special episode of the WZCC Zoroastrian Education Network. Spotlight. The aim of the Spotlight series is to fulfill the mission of the World Zoroastrian Chamber of Commerce. The mission is to provide an opportunity for those who seek to create intellectual, economic, and social value beyond resources controlled and maximize the nexus between the three values, intellectual, economic, and social, in order to achieve sustainable development for the good of the Zartoshti and other communities. In this Spotlight series, we shine the light on people and their achievements and relate these to the creation of intellectual, economic, and social value. Today, Noshir Contractor is to be interviewed by Vistas Karbari, two very proficient academics and professors. And through their conversation, they aim to highlight, in the context of the WZCC mission, Noshir, the person, and his achievements. This webinar series is being hosted by Mr. Yazdi Tatra and the WZCC. So thank you, Yazdi, for supporting us. Over to you, Vistas, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and welcome to everyone. Noshir, it's an honor and pleasure to be here with you today. You've had a fascinating and inspiring career. More about that later as we go through your resume, if you will. But I'd like to start with your path in higher education. From a BTech from one of India's premier institutions, IIT Madras, to a PhD in communications from the internationally renowned Annenberg School at USC. Two fields that generally are not spoken about in the same breath. So could you tell us a little bit about your early studies in India? What brought you to the US to pursue a degree in what many in India would consider to be diametrically opposite to the doctor, lawyer, sort of engineer trend that we have for our youth?
Well, happy to be here, excited to be here. Thank you so much for agreeing to be in conversation with me today. As I think you well remember, it was not that long ago that the tables were turned and I was leading a conversation with you. So it's a little intimidating to be in this new role here, but I have an appreciation for it. I also want at the start to express my gratitude to Karishma, to Farooq Mistry, who's not able to join us today, but has been one of the architects of this entire Spotlight series, and indeed to the WZ or Z, depending on which side of the Atlantic you are, CC, and as well as the Zoroastrian Educational Network for putting together this series that I hope, and we all hope, will help inspire the next generation of Zoroastrian students. You asked about my resume and how I got started on this. You mentioned that I did get my undergraduate degree in electrical engineering from IIT Madras in India. And you pointed out something very true, that in India, the mantra is still engineer. I would say just engineer and doctor, maybe now lawyer too. But mostly, at least at the time when I was going through school, it was basically you're either an engineer or a doctor. And I must confess that the sight of blood was so abhorrent to me that I really didn't have a choice. I didn't want to be a doctor because I didn't want to deal with blood, so my only other option was to be an engineer. But even though I grew up in India in that same environment, I was very fortunate to be educated in high school at Jesuit schools, in particular St. Xavier's in Calcutta, where I was exposed to a lot of the more interdisciplinary approaches to studying, to scholarship, being a debater, and being extemporaneous speaker, being involved in a lot of those kinds of extracurricular activity, dramatics. And that led me to think about my future to be a little less narrowly bounded by the traditional mantra that you mentioned, Vispas. So I did have some struggles there. My father and my mom both wanted me to be an engineer. My dad is a telecommunications engineer, more on that later. So when people were writing the entrance exam for IIT, which was probably not as competitive then as it is now, but still was pretty competitive at that time as well, I said I wanted to be in the diplomatic service. And my dad promptly told my mom, well, he's not writing the entrance exam because he's not smart enough to get into IIT. At which point my mom begged me to prove my dad wrong. And so I ended up writing the exam. And once I got in, there was no choice. They said, you should go there. However, I did have enlightened parents, in my opinion, who said, well, go get a degree in electrical. If after that you want to do anything else, that's totally fine. It's not a bad degree to have. And they were absolutely right. I think that the training that I had as an electrical engineer certainly has been enormously helpful in shaping the ways in which I look at the world, including in the social sciences. That said, I spent a lot of time while I was in IIT. My summer internships were always interested in looking at close to communication engineering, and that is the impacts of technology and communication technologies on what was happening in India. And so essentially, I got to the point where, at the time, this was in the in the late 70s, I would say, and early 80s. India was the site of what was then known as the world's largest social science experiment. And that was something called the Satellite Instructional Television Experiment. For the first time, they were bringing satellite television into India. At the time, India really did not have much of television at all. And what there was black and white, and were in some of the major cities for 2 or 3 hours a day. But there was a grand experiment that was set up by Indian Space Research Organization. It was part of the vision of Vikram Sarabhai and subsequently folks like Kiran Karnik, of seeing if we could use satellite television to educate the masses in the villages in India. And that to me was an incredible opportunity as an undergrad intern to spend my summers at something called the Space Application Center in Ahmedabad, where we would go into the villages and observe how individuals were reacting to seeing television for the first time and using that as a vehicle to be educated. That led me to understand that there was more to communication than just the communication that we were learning in engineering school, and propelled me to go get my PhD, as you said, at the Annenberg School at USC. Oh, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
You hold the Jane and William White professorship at Northwestern University. And that in itself is a tremendous honor. Less than 5% of our faculty actually hold endowed chairs. You're in a field that many consider to be a soft one, yet you're a pioneer in the area of computational social science and bringing that integration. And I'm sure our audiences, especially our young listeners, would love to understand a little bit more about the future of this area of study, how they can bring in a love of math and yet not have to be a mathematician, scientist, or engineer in the traditional sense.
Absolutely, yes. First of all, I didn't know the percentage. You would, as a former university president, you would be up to speed on what percentage of faculty members have endowed professorships. So that's even more intimidating.
So just in addition, for those who are listening in who are not aware of the sort of academic hierarchy we have in the United States, you can be an assistant professor, an associate professor, or a full professor. But after that, we have very few who are considered to be worthy enough in terms of their contributions to the field and their contributions to the university, that they are actually given what is termed as a chaired or an endowed professorship. These are the best of the best. And the chair actually gives them that honor and obviously provides resources so they can continue doing some tremendous work. Sorry, Noshir, just wanted to make sure everyone understood the context of that.
Yeah, you're certainly making it all sound very intimidating now, but I'm humbled to have had this opportunity. Yes. So in terms of the issue that you raised, I think it's a really important issue for especially the next generation of scholars. When I first got my faculty position at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, where I joined in 1987, and I was there for 20 years, my primary appointment at Illinois was in the department of what was then called speech communication, and I had appointments in a few other places. But I recall vividly that every time I would go back to India, to visit my parents at the time. My dad and my mom were at the time living in Baroda in Gujarat. My dad was retired from the Indian Railways. He was a telecommunications engineer. And he would arrange for me to give talks at a variety of places, including the Rotary Club and the Lions Club and Computer Society of India, where he actually was an office bearer. And unfailingly, he would introduce me as, oh, my son has a PhD, he's a professor of communication, but it's not the real communication. It's the soft communication, implying that the only real communication was what we learned in telecommunications engineering, which is what he has his degrees in. And I kept saying to him, I said, and to others who were willing to listen, that it is true that we think of what we traditionally call STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, as the hard sciences. And there is a temptation to call the social sciences as the soft sciences. I would submit that, in fact, the social sciences are not the soft sciences, but actually are the harder sciences. Because unlike most physical and life systems that we study in STEM and what we call the hard sciences, humans are very, and I'm using a technical term, very squishy, very unpredictable. When you look at materials and you're trying to predict something about it, you have a fairly good understanding that that material is going to react, or that chemical is going to react the same way every time you do an experiment. Not so with humans. Humans have awareness and an ability to be much more unpredictable. Therefore, studying social systems can be much harder than studying the so-called hard sciences. I think one of the things that I also would want to add very quickly is that behavioral and social systems are those that, by definition, require a very interdisciplinary approach. My own area of work has focused much more, as you mentioned, Viswas, on computational approaches to the social sciences. We'll talk later on about how the related fields of network science and web science also, from my scholarship, has focused on more quantitative modeling. Certainly my background as undergraduate degree in electrical engineering has informed that. However, I would want to make sure that I underscore, especially for our younger listeners, that that's not the only way to do social sciences, but it is a very exciting and a very powerful way of doing it. Social sciences is a very big tent. There are people who look at it qualitatively. There are people who look at interviews, at case studies. There are others who look at it critically, who look to question the very systems that we are looking at. And all of those are part of very important and necessary parts of the ecosystem, the intellectual ecosystem when it comes to social sciences. That said, my particular focus has been in showing our colleagues, the social sciences, the power and the excitement that can be obtained by focusing on computational social systems. As a very simple metaphor, one of the areas that I've been doing work on, and which perhaps you know about this, is helping NASA to help build understandings of how we can predict how people would work together, a social system, on long duration and long distance space exploration back to the moon and then on to Mars as part of the Artemis mission. One of the things that we've been using computational approaches is to build what started out as an adventure not unlike a weather forecasting system. How can we use computational approaches to predict how two astronauts will or will not get along well in about 6 months from now? Now, remember, these missions to Mars are going to be 3 years long, and you may have 4 to 6 people from different cultures. There's no exit strategy. Once you're on your way, that's going to happen. Beg your pardon?
Definitely important even in the current context where we have 2 astronauts on the space station who thought they were going to be there for a few days and are going to be there for more than 6 months now.
That's exactly right. And in fact, I have been in conversation with the ops part of NASA to help see what our research can show about that. So helping build models that can predict and do quite accurately a prediction of who may not get along with each other, who may see one another as a hindrance down the road is an extremely useful set of analyses to help individuals. Now, of course, NASA got greedy and said it's not just like a weather forecast. It's not just you telling us whether it's going to be hot and steamy in Arlington tomorrow. But if you're going to tell me that, how are you going to fix it? So in other words, it's not just enough to say that two people won't get along. What can you do as an intervention that might preempt that? So it's almost like saying to you, Vishwas, it's not enough for the weather forecaster to tell you that it's going to be hot and steamy tomorrow, but how can they change the weather so that it's mild and cool tomorrow? That again creates problems. All of this is a small example to say that there is a lot of advanced analytics based on a lot of good social science theories that one can build upon to be able to use computational approaches to help contribute to society.
That's fascinating. And I'd like to sort of take us along that path a little bit more, because it's something that definitely the youth do not hear about. They still hear about the very rigid sort of disciplinary silos, if you will. You were one of the first to talk about network science, and you were also, in 2009, you wrote an editorial in Science that gave birth, if you will, to the area of computational social sciences. Tell us what brought you to that juncture where you decided that rather than just continue doing what you were doing, you actually wanted to put in place a structure, if you will, for the birth of this new field, and what you needed to do to integrate it in order to make sure that you brought the very best of both fields together, or more than two fields together.
Sure. I think it started out because as I began to work on a book that my PhD mentor, Peter Manji, and I wrote called Theories of Communication Networks, something very simple and yet very compelling dawned on me. And that is, if I were to ask anyone who's listening to this, think of somebody who you're friends with, somebody who you have a good connection with, and ask yourself, how did that come about? You will see that there is a plethora of reasons that might be the case. You may say, well, that person had something that I really valued and I want to build a connection with that person. Or that person had something that I valued and there was something I could give that person in return. Or the two of us got along not because we wanted something from each other, but we had an opportunity to come together and contribute to a larger cause. We're in the middle of a political campaign season, collective action. In all of these cases, people come together to be able to accomplish something that they couldn't do individually. On the other hand, sometimes you might say, I like this person because this person is a friend of a friend. I can trust that person. Or I like somebody because they are similar to me. Birds of a feather flock together. Or because somebody is close by to me, I'm more likely to have connections with them. As we began to see all of these different reasons why people create networks, it occurred to me, no single social science discipline can explain how networks form and how they perform. So just even within the social sciences, it became quite evident to me that something like, if there's going to be a field called network science, it has to by definition be an interdiscipline, not a discipline. It needs to take into account psychological explanations, like trusting someone, one birds of a feather. It needs to take into account sociological explanations, such as participating in collective action. It needs to take into account economic explanations, where I'm acting sometimes on the basis of self-interest, for example. So as you looked at different disciplines, I became a big champion of the fact that if we have to understand certain phenomena, especially in the area of networks, they have to build upon a lot of different disciplines. And my colleagues like to say that some of the problems in the past century were easily solved by a single discipline. Today, that is still probably true, but the vast majority of social challenges that we face today, think of climate change, think about space travel, but think about other global health issues that we've had to deal with. There is no single discipline, social or physical or life science, that can help address it. We really need to think hard about how we can be informed by all of these different disciplines in order to be able to address the grand societal challenges that we face today and we will face tomorrow. Now, That said, the amount of education involved in the growth of knowledge in each of these areas makes it impossible for any of us to be the Renaissance men from the original Renaissance, where you had people like Leonardo da Vinci and others who were experts in a lot of different disciplines. What that means is each of us still has to focus on building expertise in a single area, but learn enough about other areas so that they may have what I call collaborative fluency in working with people from different areas towards goals that go beyond any one area.
So you wrote this fascinating article that I've read, the editorial that started it off, but you'd also written a seminal article in the Communications of ACM that brought up the areas that you mentioned before of web science and network science. If we look at these terms, web science, network science, computational social sciences, what advice would you give to our youth who want to follow in your footsteps in terms of what they should be studying? I mean, just as you said, there is no single sort of discipline now that can make that difference to the grand challenges. What would you urge our younger students, our learners, to focus on to prepare them to make sort of advances in these fields?
First of all, my first advice to them is don't follow my footsteps, make your own. But that said, I think that one of the things to take more seriously, I think the issue that you raise is, I think it's a really exciting time to be a scholar in this area, and to recognize that today, in certainly in the United States and West, but also I think largely in India, there is a much greater appreciation and respect to being a scholar in some of these areas that we probably didn't have as much when you and I were growing up, and we had to be sort of seen on the margins. So I think it's very exciting to understand how one can contribute to grand societal challenges. And frankly, I think the starting point can be in any of these areas. The question is more of a mindset than what area you choose. I'm not going to sit here and champion whether you should be a major or get a PhD, as the case may be, a major meaning an undergraduate degree and PhD in a particular discipline. Instead, what I would encourage us to do is have a mindset that says, whatever it is that is your passion, focus on that. But then as you begin to work in that area, keep an eye out and think hard and seek out connections to other people who are working in other disciplines. And not just other intellectual disciplines, but as the motto of this entire Spotlight series says, think hard about how what you're doing can be helped by collaborations with others from the intellectual community, others from the economic community, and others in societal communities. Because at the end of the day, it's really important for each of us to understand and begin to see a through line between what it is that we are doing, whether it is doing an assignment on partial differential equations or any other field, but how do we go and take what we are doing and see how it connects to making advances that will contribute to society in terms of intellectual, economic, and social values. I think that that's a really fun activity to do, to keep in mind what the big picture is, even while we might be delving deep into a particular issue. So that's the advice that I would give individuals. Focus on your passion, but make sure that you learn about, respect, and engage with others within the intellectual community, the economic community, and the social community largely.
Thank you. You've been a leader in academia, but you've also been a leader in terms of professional organizations. You're virtually circling the globe, if you will, setting up networks that are slightly different from the networks that you talk about, but definitely related to your field of people through chapters of organizations, globalizing the communications association, if you will. Tell us what it's like to connect people, to grow an organization, while also leading the field as a scholar and scientist, because those generally are not the same.
That's a really good question, Vistas. And I will say it's not that different. The two concepts of networks are really not that different at the end of the day. One is simply putting into practice what is being espoused in the other context. What do I mean by that? If in fact we want to be able to address these societal challenges, one of the things we have to do is, right after 9/11, there were folks at the Department of Defense who were concerned about an unfortunate network that was called the terrorist network. And they said it takes a network to beat a network in that context. I think it takes a network to study networks. And that's part of what all of these efforts that I've done. At this stage, I look at myself and I say, yeah, I'm just one person who has made some contributions in towards the scholarly discourse. But the best way to amplify what can happen in the future is to help create networks and create networks of networks. And these networks of networks, the ones I focused on, are people across different disciplines. I will say that going back 3.5 decades, every single major project I've had funded, whether it's funded by the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, NASA, private foundations like the Gates Foundation, MacArthur, and so on, every single one of them has been a collaboration across disciplines. Not just social science disciplines, but across disciplines, including many in the area of engineering and computer science. Short fun fact. One of my collaborations here at Northwestern is with a professor of mechanical engineering who is also a member of the National Academies of Engineering, Wei Chen. I began the collaboration with her only to discover afterwards that she is actually the PhD advisee of Farrokh Mistry when he was still at Georgia Tech. So small world example, but that's an example of how I work, and many of my colleagues work across it. So obviously we want to work across disciplines. But one of the things I discovered as president, especially in my role as president of the International Communication Association, which is the world's largest academic association focusing on issues related to communication research, all the way from mass communication to political communication, health communication, family communication, interpersonal communication, and so on, is that field, even though it has the word I for international in the abbreviation ICA, is primarily dominated by those in the United States and in Western Europe. Indeed, I'm the first president of ICA from India, and only the second, I was the first president of ICA from India, and only the second from Asia at the time. And so I think one of the things I did is to focus on how we can think about expanding the association so that it feels native to people in other parts of the world. There is a tendency of assumption that we in the West know how everything is to be done, and all we have to do is inject that knowledge into other parts of the world. And that has been a very unfortunate motive, well-intentioned, but unfortunate in terms of being very wrong. And so having chapters around the world, for example, for the Communication Association, allows that to be much more of a two-way reciprocal relationship rather than a top-down from the West, especially to the global South. The same thing is also true for other areas of networks where there is a lot to be learned, especially in the social sciences and behavioral sciences, where there are important regional differences and cultural differences. One can make the argument that a chemical reaction between two chemicals is going to be the same whether you do it in a lab in Evanston, Illinois, or whether you do that in Bangalore in India. That is not true when it comes to social systems. The ways in which individuals react and how they change their attitudes and behaviors to various circumstances is going to be fundamentally different in various cultures. And we may talk more about this, but certainly in the context of recent advances in digital technologies, including AI, you again see why the challenges associated with this vary across country. In India, for example, in the United States, the emphasis would be on using certain kinds of AI applications that reflect our demographics. If you look at a country like Japan, which has a much older demographic, which is where the United States is headed, that's very different from India, which still has a demographic that is much younger. Think about how the changes in demographics in these countries will motivate different types of AI systems. You need more AI systems for labor in countries that have an aging demographic like Japan and in the near future, the United States, as compared to India, where young labor is relatively inexpensive, for example. This is just one example, but there's a lot of issues to think about why it's important to make sure that we keep global as a very important priority when we look at building these networks of scholarship.
I'm glad you brought up AI. I mean, technology continues to transform society and our social interactions with each other change with advances in technology. Many view the advances with AI with concern, especially in light of what we see has happened with decreased social interaction due to the internet, cell phones, and so forth. You recently served in a panel with the inventors of the internet. In itself, a tremendous level of your stature to be included in that group. Could you share your views on this and how technology should be conceived, how it should be rolled out, and what future generations who follow in our footpaths should be looking at?
It is indeed a very important area that we can't disregard or discount. It has become a fabric of our society. I would say that the event that you're referring to is that others may not know this, but the internet is celebrating its 50th birthday this year. And so we've had 5 decades with the internet, and that became a good point in time to reflect on where the internet has been, where it is, and where it will go into the future. So Vint Cerf, who was the inventor of the internet, was somebody who was at this event of the Royal Society in London where I was on a panel, it was also attended by the inventor of the World Wide Web, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, and several other scholars who've been very involved in understanding this. Well, one of the things to keep in mind, this is something that I joke about, that every single time I'm on a flight somewhere, and someone understands that I'm studying communication technologies, they go, well, what do you think? Is this Insta thing really good? Is this Snapchat thing really good or bad? A few years ago, it was, is the web good or bad? Is email? I remember people asking me that question about email back in the 90s. And the answer to the question is that that's not the right question to be asking. Every technology is both good and bad at the same time and in spite of itself. We can go through enormous number of examples of every technology going back to the printing press, frankly, but also the telephone. We don't think of these technologies today in modern terms, but there were times when they were as exciting to society as AI is today to us. So one of the things we also have learned historically by looking at the ways in which we think about these technologies is to understand that, and I'm not the first person to say this, but we tend to overestimate the impacts of technologies in the short term and underestimate the impacts of those technologies in the long term. And so part of what we want to be doing is learning from history about our natural tendency to get into a froth about the latest thing that we see in technology, and instead to think through more carefully about what the long-term consequences might be. And more importantly, what can we do to help shape it? The entire premise of the field of web science that I've been involved in, which came out as aftermath of the invention of the web, just like after computers, we had computer science, is how is web shaping society? But importantly, how is society shaping the web? How is society shaping how technologies and the internet goes? One of my good friends and my predecessor as the managing director of the Web Science Trust, Dame Wendy Hall, also former president of the ACM, which is the Academic Association for Computer Scientists, she wrote a book called The Four Internets. And in this co-authored book that she wrote with Kieran O'Hara, she points out that today the internet is not a single entity, as much as we would like to believe it. It's in fact a splinternet. And it's splintered between the US version of it, the Chinese version of it, the European version to some extent, and the Russian version. And she said, if I had to write the book again, I would probably call the fifth internet the one in India. And so part of what we have to see is, how is society shaping how these technologies evolving? How is policy shaping the ways in which we think about social media and misinformation? or AI and misrepresentation of information. So these are all very important issues that require us to have an understanding of technology, the potential uses of technology, but equally an understanding of how society is going to relate to these technologies. So it's not simply a question of having expertise purely in technology or purely in the social system, but having an appreciation of how each of these work together and a respect for the fact that at the end of the day, it's a socio-technical system and needs to be looked at from that point of view.
As a faculty member in the United States, you've had an impact, and a very, very profound impact, on thousands of students. Many may not know that you continue to be an inspiring and enabling force for students in India, both for their studies there and in the United States. I was inspired hearing of them from you, and I'd like our listeners to gain a perspective about the global leader who continues to make a difference through enabling others to follow in his footsteps. And it would be really great if you could. I know you're going to be very humble about it, but talk a little bit about what you've been enabling in schools and for learners in India, both in India and in the United States.
Well, first of all, I must start by saying many of those who are actually on this Zoom call are people who I have a lot of regard for, not just for you, obviously including you, but what I'm doing is in many ways, in my opinion, pales in comparison to all the contributions that so many of you are doing in different ways, whether it is in terms of not only intellectual value, but economic and social value. And so I consider myself as contributing and learning from you and being inspired by many of you who are on this Zoom call, frankly, on many of these issues. I don't think that I view what I do as coming purely out of charity or altruism. And the reason I say that is because India is, in fact, one of the places that is and will continue to be even more an incredible engine when it comes to increasing value in all of the three dimensions that we are talking about here. And what that means is I have to constantly learn from them. I've been very fortunate. When I was a student at IIT Madras, I remember vividly that in my final year in IIT, which at the time was a 5-year program, I had an opportunity to represent IIT Madras at the World Debate Tournament in Princeton. And I was super excited about doing that. Yet, I didn't have the funds to be able to travel. I had never been on a plane. My dad was an engineer in the Indian Railways. I'd only been on train. Yes, I would argue first-class trains because my dad had the railway passes for it, but never been on a plane. And so I was very fortunate that a professor in physics at IIT Madras, who I had taken classes with earlier on during my undergraduate program, said to me, you know what, I have some funds from UNESCO. If you would be willing to make sure that you combine your trip by also chronicling some things we can learn about pollution and chemical pollution in particular along the way, I will be happy to buy your airline ticket for you. And to me, that was a huge game changer because it gave me an opportunity not only to come to Princeton to attend the World Debate Tournament, but it turned out that at the time I also had an offer at USC Annenberg for my PhD, and they wrote to me and said, you know, we are interested in someone who has a background in engineering, but we're not sure you know what you're getting into. But once they knew I was at Princeton for the World Debate Tournament, they flew me out to USC and I got to see the school that I ended up getting my PhD. Now, why do I bring this up? That particular episode stayed with me and made me realize how important it is to give back and to pay forward the generosity of somebody who, just out of their goodness of their heart, was able to help give me a lifting hand. Before I came to this country, after getting admission at USC, at the Annenberg School, I still had to look for funds for traveling. And one of the things that I had to do was to see where I could get scholarships. That's where the Zoroastrian community came in. And so I had learned from my mom about the scholarships available through the Tata funds, the Setna funds, the Wadia funds, and so on. And my mom helped me apply for those. In some cases, those were not funds that were exclusively targeted at Zoroastrian scholars. I remember one of my best friends from India, and who was my colleague from Madras, came with me and was also able to receive a scholarship money from one of these funds, even though he's a Tamilian. And I think that those things really helped us. I will forever be grateful that that some of the money I had was for travel, but some of the money that I was given was directly earmarked so that I could go pay a tailor to get a suit. So because I didn't have one at the time, or money that was earmarked so that I could go get a suitcase that I would be able to carry my bags to carry my materials to grad school. And those are very, very important moments, that learning moments for me. Of course, needless to say that when I was able to get a faculty position and was earning money, I was able to, one of the first things I did was paid back and then some in those cases. But what it also showed me, how much small things that we do can make a huge difference when it comes to helping those who are already fantastic. But you're not just helping them, we're really helping society, because what these individuals are going to do at the end of the day is advance and help all of us be better as a society. And so this is why I say it's not an altruistic mode. It is something that really is advancing them. Today, my sister, who's on this call, and I, when my mom passed away 20 years ago in 2004, along with my dad, we helped set up a scholarship funds in Baroda to help young Zoroastrians who want to advance in education, because education was a very important focus of my mom as well. Even though she was didn't have a career as a teacher, she was very involved in tutoring and helping coach young kids. We set that fund up. In IIT Madras today, I have funds that I give. You may say somewhat selfishly, but it's a fund that I have set up at IIT to help undergrads preferably, but any student, to travel to a conference where, if they are selected to present a paper in the area of network science, and if it's in the United States, they can come and spend a week in my lab here at the Science of Networks and Communities lab that you see out there on the logo behind me, which is the lab that I direct here at Northwestern University. Again, I think that it's so exciting at this stage in our life not to only focus on what we can do directly in terms of our own research, but amplify that by making a difference for larger communities. And so I continue to be as engaged as I can. I have collaborations. I just got back from India, where I accomplished the multiple tasks of being able to visit with my sister, to go for the Muktat ceremonies in Mumbai, but also to continue to build collaborations that I have with people in this case, it was Indian Institute of Management in Mumbai and other places, because to me, the scholarship and the potential that we have in India is incredible. And I absolutely am in awe and a big cheerleader for continuing to do that. And as you know, one of our younger colleagues here at Northwestern is also a student who is here in large part because he was mentored by Farooq Mistry from Pune, and is now a PhD student here in mechanical engineering, focusing on AI at Northwestern. And to me, at this point, those are the kinds of accomplishments that are far more enduring than what I might do by writing a single paper.
Renowned academic, global professional leader, visionary, these and many other descriptions fall short of encompassing you as a Zoroastrian. I'm sure that youth are in awe of what you've done and continue to do, but what advice would you have for them?
Well, I think that one of the things I've learned, and I hope that this is something that comes both out of my research, but also out of my value system, is the power of building networks. The tag that I shared on this was think networks. And I use that phrase, think networks, to mean a couple of different things. In my case, I look at any problem as a network problem. I look at any solution as a network solution. We don't live as in an atomistic world where each of us acts by ourselves. Today, these networks are not just human networks, but human AI networks, where we are increasingly in this constellation of entities where technologies and AI in particular play an important role. So think networks from that point of view. I've studied networks. I do research on networks. As you kindly pointed out, I also build networks because I think that it takes networks to study networks. And those networks are global networks, interdisciplinary networks, etc. The one thing, again, that I can say from research that I would give as important advice to people, I'll make two comments about this. One is to say, it's very common when we think of networking that we think it's icky. We think it's sort of sleazy. When I talk to my undergrads, especially when I talk at the Kellogg School of Management or to executive classes, and people go, yeah, I have to build networks. I hate it. It makes me feel all so icky and slimy that I have to go networking. And that is very unfortunate, but it is very real. People do think of networks as being icky. The reason people do that is because they bring the wrong mindset to network. Allow me to explain. When I think about networks and I talk to people, well, what do you do when someone says you have to network? Well, I have to go to this event and I have to go ask people things like, I want to go meet somebody who I don't know. And I'm trying to figure out in the first couple of minutes, what can this person do for me? It's like me saying, okay, I'm talking to this person. I know that Vistas is this former president, incredible scholar. I have 2 minutes. What can he do for me? That's the problem. The problem is if you go to every interaction that you have, not by asking the question, what Vistas can do for me, but asking the flip question, what can I do for Vistas? Learn more about that. What that means is you're going to learn more about that person. Learn more about what she or he does, what is it that they are doing, and it makes you feel that you can make a difference. And just because Vistas is a former president and celebrity and National Academy of Inventors and so on, that doesn't mean that you can't do something for that person. I keep saying young people who are intimidated by seniors should realize that we need to have that age diversity in our networks and our mentors. So my first message is don't go into a situation by thinking what so-and-so can do for you, but start by what you can do for that person. The research is very clear. The more people take the second approach, what you can do for that person, the greater the benefits that accrue to everyone, including you. That might seem counterintuitive, but the research is unequivocal. You benefit more, others benefit more if people bring the mindset of what I can do for someone else rather than what they do. It's called a reciprocity ring. I do something for you, you are now more motivated to do something for someone else, who will do it for someone else, who in turn might come and do it for you. And the final message is a very short and brief message. I started out by saying that my interest in interdisciplinary approaches came from trying to understand why we build networks. I asked you to play a mental experiment with you. Think of a friend and say, why is it that you became friends with this person? And we spent a lot of time focusing on why we make networks. And you may ask the question, why are we spending all this time learning about why we make networks? And my answer is very simple. In the short term, we make networks. But the reason we make networks is because in the long term, networks make us.
Fascinating, inspiring, and I'm sure those who are listening to it have it's a number of questions for you, questions for guidance, as well as about the wonderful work that you've done. Before I hand back to Karishma, are there any last thoughts that you have that I haven't sort of touched on?
Well, no, I think that it's always exciting to have an opportunity to share these ideas with others. I think you remind me of how important it is to be humble and to recognize that we ourselves have built upon and stood on the shoulders of people who came before us. And at this point, I was reading a book recently titled Halftime. And it said, you may spend the first half of your life focusing on trying to to be successful in different ways that we choose to be. But once you reach the halftime of life, and I would reckon, in all modesty, that you and I probably have reached the halftime of our lives, we focus more on significance rather than success, making a difference. And my participation and efforts with this community, with the WZCC, with Zen, the Zoroastrian Education Network, with all of the work that we do in these different contexts, is really focused on that second part of trying to see what we can do to build significance. So those are the thoughts that I would like to leave you with.
Thank you very much, Noshir. Thanks for taking the time and for sharing your views as well as your experiences, not just with those who are attending today, but those who will be listening to this in the future. So with that, Karishma, if you'd like to take over and let's say wrap up.
Thank you very much, Vistasp and Noshir. The key that we've seen today has left me a little speechless, but I'll try and do the best I can, as Farooq would do, to highlight a few things that we've seen today. In the Zoroastrian Faculty Network, or the Zoroastrian Education Network, what Noshir said last is what everyone is trying to do, to give back. And as we do that, we're reminded of the prayer that we see, the Yathahu Vairyo prayer, to take good action based on the good mind and then share it. And that's what the World Zoroastrian Chamber of Commerce has been trying to do for many, many years, by maximizing the nexus between the three values, intellectual, social, and economic, to drive action, to go beyond resources controlled. What Noshir took us through today, and I won't try and summarize it, but just pick up a few of the points so that we can retrace this marvelous dialogue of the last 40 minutes. He started with his parents, and interestingly, Thriti Pandol is a lady whom my mom knew, and actually the support that he got from his parents was the first network he had that allowed him to build education that widened his horizons and be adaptable. And that's virtually the guidance he's giving to the next generation. But in his work, Noshir seems to have built on communication to predict how we can work together more effectively. And I'm interested to hear how we can solve problems that these predictions bring up, to help people not just predict the problem, but to find out how to work well together. And he gave us a hint as to how we might do this, to build connections around value, so that the expertise and the collaborative fluency that is built on the interconnectedness between disciplines and people. And as he says, if students could find our purpose, make networks in order to engage, we might succeed in optimizing the forming and the performing of the networks of network. But at the bottom line being, what value do we contribute to the network? And then, who knows, the network might make us. Let's think back to some of the messages of Asho Zarathustra. In the Gathas in 51.16, it actually says this: let us go together for the common good of all. So this idea of collaboration and the best for all is there. But we all know this. We say the word Frasho Kerathi, progress of the collective and the individual. And we know that happiness comes to one who gives happiness to others. So Noshir, in his own way, as he's taken us through the academic nuances of building networks, has highlighted some of the important parts of the Zoroastrian tradition of giving back. Let's now open up the floor to all of you. So thank you very much, Vistasp. In Farooq Mystery's absence, may I extend his gratitude to both Noshir and to you, Vistasp, for doing this splendid thinking outside the box and delimiting our thoughts. Natalie, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Professor Contractor, my thought...
Call me Noshir. Call me Nosh or Noshir, please.
Noshir. My thought while you were speaking was, how do you see the role of the individual in regard to all of the network science that you're doing? And in particular, I got the most concerned when you talked about the book, The Four Internets. And you described all of that in terms of society and society's shaping and policies with regard to the internet. But we have such phenomenal human beings popping up all through history that stand out beyond any network, beyond anything. I mean, in Illinois, you have Abraham Lincoln, where I grew up in Springfield, Illinois. How would you put him in a network? So, Mike, and then when you talked about your own funding for students and so forth with the travel fund and all, there you got to the idea of uplifting an individual and empowering that individual with what you can do for them. Also, when you're talking about when you're networking.
Natalie, shall we take one at a time and let others come in as well?
Sure. I want to understand how you see the role of the network.
No, I think the question I can anticipate the question you're asking, which in my mind is quite related to the first one. I'll give a very simple illustration of this point. It's a very important point, and it's an enduring debate. What is more important, the individual or these networks, etc.? I'll encourage you to take a look at a very famous biographer that you may have heard of by the name of Walter Isaacson. Walter Isaacson is well known for writing the biographies of people like Einstein, I think Steve Jobs, a lot of very well-known people through history. But then more recently, the most recent book he wrote was on another illustrious individual, Elon Musk. But setting that aside, in between, he wrote a book on a person by the name, the book was titled The Innovators. And in it, he says, I've spent a lot of time writing about individuals. And it occurs to me that while we as a society have this fascination for looking at the hero, whether it's a science hero or a political hero, as he said, Abraham Lincoln and so on, he said in this book that, in fact, if you look at each of these individuals, you realize there is a team or a network around them. And one of the things he points out that is fascinating is that if you look at the people who were involved, like people like Edison and others, he compares two individuals, the person we know like Edison with a person we probably don't know. He looks at the inventions of the computer, Ada Lovelace, names that we often don't think of, but we should when we think about the invention of the computer and the woman who was behind a lot of those ideas. But they compare and say that the person who succeeded versus the person who didn't succeed had a very powerful network around them, and the other person did not have it. So even somebody who's made a career out of glorifying biographies of individual heroes has noted and chronicled the extent to which this networks has played a role in their creation. Now, one can debate which came first, the network or the individual. It could be that part of the skills of these success stories were they were able to corral, they were able to mobilize a network around them. Or you can make an argument, well, the network was there and they just happened to be at the right time in the right place. That's a separate debate that continues to exist. But I think that these ideas that you point out that seem to be contradictory or at least seem to be a tension are actually can be reconciled by thinking of individuals and the networks around them.
Thank you.
I think I saw a hand from Vilu, but maybe others too. Oh, there's several. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead. Mel, I think you're next, right?
Sure. Thank you very much, Noshir. Enjoyed as usual. As an electrical engineer, I'm not going to ask you an electrical question. We'll leave that for another day. But in terms of our WZCC and, as Parsis and Zoroastrians are spread across the world, my question is, how do any ideas as to how we, in this day of internet, Zoom, etc., do more across categories? And how do we make our networks more let's say there are more givers to the network, if you can just throw some light there, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, I think that I am delinquent in not sending in a draft of a chapter that I promised Jenny Rose about the role of social media in terms of promoting our community. But I think one of the things that I'm working on in that, and my main motivation for writing that, Mel, is very much in line with what you're saying. And that is, one of the wonderful aspects about all these new technologies, these networking technologies and social technologies, is that it gives really, really small communities like ours the ability to be able to connect with one another and reach what in some contexts is called as critical mass. The diaspora that we thought about in yesteryears was typically geographically bounded. But now we have an opportunity to create a virtual diaspora, and
Indeed.
one that for the first time can bring collective action, collective consciousness, collective awareness, and across different geographies and provided. That does not mean that I'm not arguing for not meeting face to face. Some of the most fulfilling moments have been when I've been able to physically attend events like the Zoroastrian Congress that we had in New York a couple of years ago, and then even the Parliament of Religions, the world religions that brought together people from the Zoroastrian community and others here in Chicago, for example, this past year. So I'm not suggesting that technology replaces it, but it provides a way to organize it. In fact, one of the things that technology does is give us an opportunity to organize more face-to-face events more adequately and more successfully across different events. And that is something that research has shown that people don't think about. So I'm very optimistic and bullish about the use of technology. I'm also I'm acutely aware that when trying to reach the younger generation, we need to rethink about whether we consider having events such as this on channels like Zoom, or whether we want to instead be focusing on some of the channels that the younger generation is much more excited about, things like Instagram, things like Snapchat. I see that Roshan and Rohington are on the call, and we've had a lot of discussion as part of the SSZ on how much we should do with our website. And one of the things I keep looking at is to look at what the younger generation of Zarathushtis are doing, building social media and putting things instead on Instagram, which is where the kids are. And so I think we have to be responsive and not equate all technology, but recognize some that are emerging technology, especially amongst the younger generation, and be able to focus on those two.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Noshir, can I ask you one question? What artificial intelligence will play a role in space research and also in various other things? In your opinion, what role will artificial intelligence play in the future?
I think the easiest, the shortest way, I know we're short on time, so the shortest way of addressing that question is not to think about AI as something that is going to replace individuals. It will replace some jobs, no questions about it. It will definitely make some things, hopefully things that we might find tedious, out of the way. I think the real power that we have to continue to focus on is to look at it as augmenting, to be an augment to what we have as human intelligence, and to consider that as being able to provide us opportunities to be even better. A piece of research that makes this argument. Just as in past technologies, it turns out that those who are the smartest, the information haves in society today, and I'll include everyone on this call in that category, those individuals are the ones who seem to benefit much more from the use of AI than the have-nots. So technologies like AI uplift everyone, but they differentially uplift those who are already doing well as compared to others. This is not necessarily a good thing because it means you've increased the gap between the haves and the have-nots, but we have to recognize that everyone benefits from these technologies, and we need to think about how to harness that use in a way that would be advantageous to society at large.
Yeah, thank you.
Good question.
Yeah, excellent talk. Saw many parallels between what you've been through and, was it Mr. Malikamwala who was responsible for the Tata Scholarship? I think
so.
Because those questions,
Yes.
sort of were so, brought back so many memories.
Oh my goodness,
of my
I hadn't
days
thought
with
about
the Jain Tata scholarship and the Setna. I, went through the same route to go for my PhD in Strasbourg, in University of Strasbourg, France.
Yeah.
And he was
Oh my
the sort
goodness.
of the guiding
Wow.
light there. But anyway, I'm a biologist, and I have actually initiated this major project called the Avesta Genome Project, based on the Zoroastrian Parsi
Villu?
endogamous.
Could we have your question, please, Villu?
Pardon?
Could we have your question?
Yeah. The question
please?
is that this project, there is what I'm seeing is a lot of RNA, DNA interactions, protein interaction, and these are all networks, and they're all
Yes.
linked to disease. And so ultimately, what's happening in the cell is multiple networks forming, in some cases giving you a better outcome, in some cases resulting in disease. Would your network software, can we put it onto this potential data that I have, and can we build a collaboration there? That is my question.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm looking forward to your session as well coming up in this. But I will just say that the field of network science, by definition, is one that recognizes that it looks not just at social networks, which is what I've spoken of, but in fact, a host of networks. In the chat, I put a link to something called the Net Sci Society, the Network Science Society, which has people who study protein networks, food networks, electrical grid networks, etc. And there's a lot of synergy in looking at methodologies that could be applied in modeling strategies from one to the other. I was very fortunate to be on the founding board of directors of the Network Science Society when it started, and I'm a fellow of the Network Science Society. But it's exactly that issue. If you look at the link I sent, the homepage says interdisciplinary community tackling current scientific and societal challenges, including the RNA, DNA, and the protein networks that you talked about. So, yes, come and join us.
Yeah, I would love to discuss this, because I don't know if you know, but Google has released Alpha protein, the Alpha 2, and where they have already released all the proteome data. So how can we
This
move?
is the community you need to connect with if you want to look at it across beyond that.
Leapfrog there, yeah. That's what I would.
Thank you.
I'll be in touch.
Over to you, Roshan and Setna, please.
Yeah, hello, Noshir.
Hello.
We want to thank you for all the values you bring to all of our organizations, and most importantly, the Chamber of Commerce and the SSZ and so on. It opened my eyes that all these organizations that we formed are really networks. And I think that's the way we ought to look at them.
Brendan, can you speak a little louder?
Yeah. So all these organizations that we have built are really networks, and it kind of opened my eyes that we should look at those organizations in those terms. The one thing that I always kind of have in mind is providence. Things happen because it's providential. And that certainly is something that I always keep in mind. We try and all of a sudden things click. So the providence is very important. And one thing I may ask you is how to overcome biases. People have bias, and you try and form a network, but the bias always sets you back. And to overcome that, if we can do that, we'll be a long way ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, it's very kind of you to say that. You may not be somebody. You may have just said, "I now realize these are networks." You, more than anyone that I know in the Zoroastrian community, has been the maestro of networks in creating all these different configurations that you have done. So it's very modest of you to sit there and go, "Oh, I didn't think about this until now as a network." Come on, Rohinton, you and Roshan have been incredible in putting together all of these networks over the last decades, literally. And I do think, though, that you're right. I think part of what we've seen is if you look at even our community, whether it's things like Fazana or the ZAC or the ZMC, or whether it is SSZ, WZCC, and the funds that Edel was talking about, these are all entities that benefit by being connected to each other, having some folks that are in common with one another. And so I think that they're recognizing that these synergies exist is going to be very, very important. I mean, two other points you made. One was about the providence. I think one of the things, you're absolutely right, that people have to continue to be patient. I'm going to guess Vistas will agree with me on this. I use a sports metaphor about a famous football quarterback from Wisconsin for the Green Bay Packers by the name of Brett Favre. And Brett Favre was very well accomplished at his time and had the record of having, at least at the time when he was still active, of having the highest number of touchdowns and the highest number of passing yards. He also had the highest number of interceptions. What does that mean? That means he tried a lot, failed a lot, and almost everyone I know who's my hero in academia will say that everyone who's got a lot of funded grants and a lot of publications and all the kinds of metrics that we look at in academia have also had the most rejects and the most failures in attempts that they've done in that context. And that speaks to your point about recognizing you only see the good side. Our CVs don't tell us about all the things we didn't get. But I think that is an important awareness for people not to get disappointed by these kinds of issues. The last issue, the last item you brought up about bias, I think that it is, of course, it's something that continues to be a big challenge. We are very, very fortunate that one of our fellow Zoroastrians, Mahzarin Banaji, is one of the world's leading scholars, probably the leading scholar, the Harvard psychologist, Mahzarin Banaji, who's been studying and helping us understand what we call as implicit bias tests. And in fact, if you recall, she gave a talk about this at the Congress that we had in New York a couple of years ago. The irony is awareness doesn't necessarily eliminate it. And that's part of the challenge of anything that is implicit in this case. But it certainly helps to be able to talk about it and be mindful. So I'm not saying give up on it. It's just going to always be there or deal with it. But it's a constant struggle that we have to face in our life and in our community. So.
Should I ask my question? Yeah, Noshir, as you know, I'm a absolutely firm believer in networking. I think networking is what helped me as an entrepreneur and has been unbelievably important and critical even in fundraising. It's, networks is absolutely critical in fundraising. The question I have is that with your talk about networks and social science and about getting along with people, we frequently hear about consensus and harmony. Okay? And at some point, I feel that's not optimal, and we have to draw the line and talk about purposeful harmony, take an action, right or wrong, correct ourselves and move forward. And I'd like your comment on that, because in our associations, we spend way too much time on trying to get 100% harmony, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I think, first of all, again, Edel, thank you for everything you've done and the leader that you've been in our community, both in your own work, but also inspiring others in terms of entrepreneurship and in particular, the economic value that of the three that we are talking about here in the Spotlight series. I think that there's a well-established amount of literature about the dangers of what some people would call groupthink. That if everyone agrees too quickly on something, then that's probably a bad idea. And that, in fact, most good ideas come about by what is called as creative friction. And that creative friction means that you can, at times, agree to disagree. and that there's always an essence in which you need to be respectful about it, as some people say, disagree agreeably. But at the same time, most new ideas come by juxtaposing and taking a risk in terms of putting together new ideas. And as I said earlier, there is every reason to believe that some of them will fail, as I mentioned in my response to Rohington and Roshan, and that's okay. That is one of the things that I think certainly the entrepreneurial community in the United States has learned. Growing up in India, there was a lot of stigma associated with that, at least when I remember in the society that I went with. But today that we are changing that mindset, both in India as well, and certainly in this country. So I agree that if we as a community want to be able to move forward, building 100% consensus on issues will maybe safe, but not necessarily take us far. And that in order to break new ground, we may have to agree to disagree agreeably.
Thank you. A second question, sort of very down to earth question. Students from India, in the 60s and 70s, we used to be maybe 5 or 6 Zoroastrians in IITs and medical colleges. And if you look at the results today, you're lucky if there's one person in an IIT in a given year. And I think the same trend is also in medicine. What can WZCC do as in practical, steps to change this phenomenon? Not that IITs is the only way to succeed, but it is one of the ways. And how can we change that mindset where people are willing to work hard enough to try and get in here?
Yeah, I'm glad you said the last thing, and that is not only IIT is not the only way to succeed, as I know you and I both are products of the IIT system, even though you remind me on every occasion that we went to different IITs and you went to the better one. But nonetheless, I think that one has to recognize that I would say what we need to do is to help promote the younger Zoroastrian community to accomplish whatever it is that they want. It might be engineering, it could include engineering or medicine, but there are other ways in which we can help facilitate our younger generation to contribute to society. I know that may not be the answer you're looking for, because I know there's a bias for us to say, oh, we want others to be engineers or doctors like us. Of course, and certainly, we've seen that happen. I think that there's a related challenge that we also face, and that is today, you mentioned that there were few Zoroastrians who were in IIT at a time, but now there are fewer. When you and I graduated, there were a lot more Indians who were coming to the United States to get advanced degrees and get PhDs. Today, today that has changed completely. And we get very few Indians, especially from some of the more elite institutions in India, who are applying to graduate programs. So I could reverse the question and say, of course, we could be saying, what can we do to bring more Indians to the United States? I would love, from an academic point of view, the intellectual of the three values we're talking about, I would love more Zoroastrians and generally more Indians to be considering a career in academia. But part of the reason they're not coming is because they have great industry opportunities in India, which we did not have when we were growing up. My director of IIT Madras famously said at our commencement that he didn't blame 75 or 80% of us in our cohort who ended up going to the United States because our Indian industry at the time was not capable of leveraging the training that we had received at IIT Madras. Unfortunately, he lost his job for saying that. P.V. Indaresan was fired that year as the director of IIT Madras. He continued to be important. He's now passed on. But we could say that we see these changes that are happening, and I think we should do everything we can to help facilitate Zoroastrians to be able to think about getting into academia, but also to be entrepreneurs, for example, or in other social contexts. So I think it is important for us. not to channel all our energy just in terms of engineering doctrine. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I think that we need to broaden our support across different areas, personally.
Okay. Baba Meher, Mr. Meher Amal, then Zubin Sethman.
Well, this was truly a very insightful and intuitive interaction of the meeting of the minds. It was interesting to note, Noshir, how you built your inspiration for education through communication. It was very heartwarming to note that your take on computational approaches for predicting behavioral aspects in society. That was very fascinating. I was also very impressed when you mentioned about building connection through contribution, which truly resonates with my spirit. And I loved your take on it takes a network to understand a network. Very valuable statement how networks form and how they perform, and how to adopt a multidisciplinary approach to accomplish your purpose with dignity by thinking networks. I was also very truly touched by your approach on how to enhance the scope of your passion to make a difference in the life of humanity. Now, personally, I believe as an electrical engineer that communication is the lifeblood of civilization. So I would like to say thank you for your contribution to focus on education through communication for the benefit of civilization. And being an electrical engineer, some time ago, one person asked me this question: what does technology mean to you? And my response was, it's okay for you to use technology as long as the technology does not use you. Having said that, thank you, Vistas and Noshir, for this intellectual discussion for our future generation. May our Ramazda be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Baba Meher. Did you have?
Go ahead, yes.
I was just going to say, did you have a question for Noshir?
No, I just wanted to share some reflections based on this insightful interaction. It was absolutely fabulous. Thank you once again, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Noshir.
I was
have a
going to say that,
response, a thought?
the response I'd have is that you summarized what I was trying to say better than what I know. We have an AI companion that will also provide a summary of this conversation, but I reckon that the summary that you provided put me to shame because you said it much more succinctly than I did. So thank you very much for that summary, Mayor.
Zubin, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Karishma. Noshir, good afternoon. I'm sorry, I'm on holiday in Mexico at the moment. I completely messed up with the timings, and so I missed your talk. But I just joined when the questions started, and some interesting interactions there. I just wanted to pick up on something that you talked about earlier on about the networks and using the channels and then the medium that are appropriate. So I guess preface it by saying that I'm a tenured professor of entrepreneurial marketing and consumer behavior in London. And one of my thoughts for our community that I'm kind of constantly banging on about is that we absolutely should, wholeheartedly agree with you, we should be using the language and the medium that we know our audience uses. So when you talk about younger people perhaps using Instagram or Snapchat, I've certainly done a number of live Instagram feeds, if you like, talking to my younger community, and the students and so on and so forth. So I guess my not so much question, but comment, and just perhaps, if you want to kind of further add that is, should we be, how do we go about promoting this? Because I think, look, I mean, the majority of us, and I mean this with the absolute greatest of respect, okay? The majority of us on this call right now,
Yes.
probably don't fully understand the power of some of the kind of other nuanced social media platforms, and whilst we might use them, there's a long way to actually go. So I think the answer is to actually empower our younger people to come forward and say, you know what, you understand this tech way better than we do, so please take charge of it. This is kind of what we want to achieve. Go forth and sort it out.
Okay, I'm gonna respond to
dictate-
you because I know that Karishma is giving us the hook on there. But I'll tell you,
Sure.
so Zubin, first of all, you being a professor in the area of entrepreneurship and marketing, clearly you have a good insight on this issue. I agree with you. I think one of the things that in the SSZ, where I worked with Rohington and Roshan and several others, this issue has come up about, to what extent are we targeting at the younger generation? And I'll give you an example, and then I'll give you a specific example, and then a take. One of the most interesting conversations that I actually have had in the Zoroastrian community is with a young lady by the name of Tanya Hoshi. Tanya, turns out, is the chief social media officer for Fazana.
Mhm.
That to me was really interesting because I see what she posts and I see that she is the kind of person who is able to understand and relate with and target messages to that younger generation that we have.
Yeah.
Right? That's
Yeah.
exactly what I think you're alluding to. That's a
Yeah.
specific instance. I've only spoken to her a couple of times. She probably never remembers having spoken to me, but it made a difference to me. And I use that as an important sort of data point in understanding what we need to do here. Having a young chief social media officer. The general point is, in terms of networks, we tend not to we think of diversity in networks in terms of ethnicity, education, maybe geography, maybe disciplines. We don't think of it in terms of age. And one of the things I'm a firm believer is that I'm doing something wrong if I don't have mentors who are at least 3 decades younger than me. I learn a lot more from them than I do from most other generations. And I think we as a community, as a Zoroastrian community, need to keep that front and center in terms of being able to make sure that we are able to be able to advance these ideas and market these ideas to the younger generation.
Absolutely. I just want to say one very quick last thing, okay? Essentially, it doesn't matter how we encode our messages in whichever networks. If the folks are not able to decode those messages, then what's the point?
Yep,
But
exactly.
thank you, Noshir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Zubin. Noshir, Vistas, before I hand over to Percy for his address to the WZCC audience, do you have any final thoughts?
I think Natalie wants to speak. She has raised her hand.
Oh.
Thank you. I have one question, if I might. When you were discussing people and their hesitance about networking, you brought up something very important that I can really reinforce. You must go into it thinking, how can I help this other person, this new person in front of me? It helps so much to do that. And you mentioned that there was explicit research on this. I've been advised about this in business context, and it's really helped me. But I would like to have references for the explicit research and to know more on that specific point. It's been very helpful.
Sure. Okay. So there is the person I was referring to is now Professor Emeritus at the University of Michigan. His name is Wayne Baker, and I'm putting a link to work that he's done on the reciprocity ring, and there's a Center for Positive Organizations that he talks about. The other person who's written a lot about this and more, I would say, in a more sort of accessible to a general audience, is a book that was written by Adam Grant, who is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School of Management. And he wrote a book called Give and Take. And even though as you can tell from the title of that book, and I'll put that into the Zoom chat as well. So Adam is like, you should follow him on social media. And this is a guy who had millions and millions of followers. He's definitely transcended being a super good academic to also being somebody who is incredibly good at being able to communicate with the general public. So in his book, Give and Take, he summarizes a lot of the research that focuses on this issue of why by giving why helping others, if you click on it, the byline is why helping others drives our success, which I think is exactly what you're referring to. Fun fact, Adam Grant, as a PhD student, served as a teaching assistant for Wayne Baker at the University of Michigan. So that's how he first got interested in this idea. They created this game called the Reciprocity Ring that I mentioned earlier. And I'm sure Wayne is incredibly proud of all the work that he's done. But one of the things that we're all grateful is that he inspired Adam Grant to be able to continue and work in this area and make exactly the point that you were asking about, Natalie, about how helping others drives our collective success.
Thank you very much, Natalie and Noshir. We'll hand over to Percy Master. Thank you, Vistas, for carrying that dialogue out splendidly. Percy, over to you.
Okay. So greetings to everybody from WZCC. Thanks to Farokh and Karishma for bringing this wonderful spotlight to our viewers. And most importantly, thanks to Noshir and Vistas for finding the time from their busy schedule to take part in this spotlight today. It was very inspirational. I think, Noshir, I have no words to describe what you have done and what you have achieved. And same goes for Vistas. And I think both of you are a great inspiration for all our youngsters. They should take a thief out of your book. I hope they do so. As far as WZC is concerned, our objective is to think ahead and have a strategic plan in place for the future. In this, both the seniors and the young members have to work in tandem if we want to dream for a bright future for our community. WZCC on its part has taken a few path-breaking initiatives to ensure that this becomes a reality. We are focused on intellectual development of our community. As you have seen today, there is no substitute for education, and knowledge is just unlimited. So we have to really focus on that. So by this intellectual and economic values that we are wanting to inculcate, we can develop our community so that it can progress by encouraging the professionals and entrepreneurs, and finally create a social value system. We are promoting youth in a very big way to ensure that this, we are promoting youth in a very big way to ensure that this becomes a reality. Our Zoroastrian religion from its inception has promoted gender equality, and so we have granted and created a V wing, which also looks at women empowerment. And this is another area where WZCC is focusing big time. We talked about social media, and I think we are promoting that also in a very big way by encouraging Instagram, Facebook, and other social media. All the above can happen if we develop more members naturally and empower entrepreneurs and professionals by giving them financial assistance and by mentoring them. Of course, without social media, as I said, and its outreach, we will not be able to reach each and every member of our small community, which is spread across continents now. These are the few focus areas which WZCC is promoting, and all the directors, chapter chairs, and members have to work together as a team if we want to succeed. Delegating responsibilities location-wise, promoting networking globally, and interaction with other communities and chambers of commerce will broaden our horizon and create a vision for the next generation to come. We have tied up with various chambers of commerce, and in fact are members now of the International Chamber of Commerce, having over 250 chambers. And so the networking is very much there, but we have to take advantage of it. Most of you are aware that we have a startup fund scheme, both in India and overseas, especially in USA, Canada, and UK. It's operational now. This scheme in India, which is now renamed as Minu Shroff Memorial Fund, we give up to 25 lakhs interest-free loans to be paid over a period of 3 years rather, with a 6-month moratorium. This means that an upcoming entrepreneur or a professional can easily pay the EMIs if he wants to succeed and take advantage of this. There is a business advisory committee that scrutinizes all these applications and then passes them for funding. Under this scheme, we have financed almost 20 startups so far, and all are doing extremely well and without any defaults. The funds that we have created in North America goes by the name of ZF, as Adel has already said. Under this scheme, we give up to USD $50,000 interest-free plus an education scholarship to deserving candidates. Here also, we have succeeded in giving almost 7 startups, and they are also doing extremely well. So you can see we have these 2 startup schemes that our community members can and should take advantage of. Over and above this, we have members who can act as mentors and also facilitate equity funding through Tiger's Den, which is being held almost once a year. Nothing is achieved without hard work and persuasion. As I said, the seniors and the youth have to work together, and in this, I would sincerely request all the seniors present here today and who are probably parents and grandparents to see that right from the childhood, youngsters are given the right direction. Focus on religion, education, sports, and learn the history of our forefathers who achieved so many things and became extremely good businessmen and professionals. If you look back with pride, I'm sure you will strive to do better in your lives ahead. As they say, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. But if you want to walk far, you have to walk together. So with these few words, we let us all become proactive and encourage our youngsters to do better in their lives. It is up to us to encourage them. The future belongs to the youth. And if any one of you are not yet WZCC members, I would request you to become one, because when you become members, you get involved in community work, and that is the need of the hour, I would say. So thank you very much for this wonderful spotlight that we had. The Spotlight series is indeed a very great success, and we have learned so many things from so many individuals that our community is real proud of. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much, Percy. And that brings us to the end of this session, where we thank our speakers today, and we give thanks to our speakers of the next Spotlight series, which is Villu Morabala Patel in conversation with Adel Davar. That will be on the 22nd of September at the same time as today. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you, Yazdi, for supporting this series right through. We'll now stop the recording of the dialogue and stay on the call for a dialogue session with community building in mind. Thank you, Yazdi.